Hello. Today I was putting together another video on the military-industrial complex, but something happened yesterday that I felt like I had to address immediately. On Monday, US President Barack Obama was in Vietnam, and he made an announcement. He decided that the United States will now lift all restrictions on arms exports to Vietnam. Basically now we'll sell them anything. Now, Obama pitched this as a step that's very similar to his policy towards Cuba. It's just a step towards peace and really finally putting the Cold War to bed. As I pointed out elsewhere, I'm a huge fan of Obama's Cuba policy. Huge. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. But this is completely different. Let's leave aside the ridiculousness of the idea of selling weapons as a measure of peace and focus on what we're actually doing here. We're committing to sell weapons to Vietnam so that they can be used against China. To be clear, there's no specific sales going on here. The ban has just been lifted, indicating that this is something we're going to do going forward. And rest assured, it's something that we're going to do going forward. We know that, Vietnam knows that, and most importantly, China knows that. This is not a move towards peace. This is another in a long series of moves towards war with China. It's billed as containment or strengthening allies or being a good partner to our friends in Asia. But make no mistake, the US government is trying to do to China exactly what we've done to Russia. We're trying to NATO China. I've covered elsewhere at some length the way that the story we're told about Russia and its relationship with the United States is not exactly accurate. Sure, Vladimir Putin's the worst. He's a terrible guy. But the reason he felt compelled to get involved in Ukraine was the progressive encirclement of Russia by NATO. NATO kept expanding in 25 years after the end of the Cold War, and when it looked like they were going to expand into Ukraine, a country that has been historically a part of the Russian sphere of influence, Russia acted. Of course, obviously, now we're committed. We need NATO. We need to be there. But the reason we're there is because NATO created the situation. We're now trying to do the exact same thing with China. When is China in the news? It seems like now every few months, every 2 or 3 months, there's something going on in the South China Sea. There's some islands there, there's really nothing there of any importance, but the Chinese have been building them up, trying to militarize them, and it becomes an internationally reported incident every couple months or so. China's actions around these islands certainly are aggressive, but we're only told one half of the story when we read about it. China complains of a US policy of encirclement, and that's exactly what we're doing. Have you heard of the pivot to Asia? The pivot to Asia was a conscious effort on the part of the Obama administration to focus more resources on Asia. Some of these resources have been diplomatic, but more importantly, they've been economic and they've been military. We're trying to get Japan to rearm. We built a military base in Australia. Most importantly, we've been carving off historic Chinese allies. Myanmar has gone from a country that was very firmly in the Chinese camp to one that is very firmly in the Western camp. Yes, it's fantastic that they're transitioning towards democracy, but we shouldn't forget what this looks like to the Chinese leadership. We've also been working to do the same to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, there's no question of democracy. It's still a communist one-party regime, much like China, but now it's becoming our one-party communist regime. This is an extremely frustrating process to watch, because the United States is once again making a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of aggressiveness of another country. Russia didn't become aggressive because it's naturally evil. It became aggressive because we took actions to make it happen. We are now taking the exact same actions towards China. You know what? I don't know a ton about the region. China is certainly a scary country, and we should be concerned about their rise and how best to peacefully manage it. But when I look at coverage of this issue, When I look at coverage coming out of China, it's so blindingly one-sided. Today we decided to sell arms to Vietnam. Probably in the next couple weeks, couple months, there'll be something else in the South China Sea. And it'll be described as if China is just out of nowhere, as this crazy, crazy, aggressive country has decided to take some terrible step in these islands. But when we look at these issues, when we look at the aggressive steps that China takes, we also need to recognize that the United States is taking very aggressive steps against China. Because the United States is so much more powerful than China, these steps don't look as clearly aggressive. We've got the economic weight and the institutional weight to make gestures that can be portrayed as friendly and pro-democracy and positive that come across to the Chinese as existential threats. We need to be aware that developments in Asia are not just a question of an aggressive rising China. They're also a question of an aggressive defensive United States. The world will be a much safer, happier place if we can just avoid NATOing China. Don't let them NATO China. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, please click on the Patreon link here to find out how.